it's a perfect, nice segue into, I suppose, some of the things we want to say.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And welcome again to CWS as it is. You're in studio, my brother.
Well, thank you. I'm in Brooklyn. This is always good to be home. I mean, I know I'm Guyanese by birth, but somehow Brooklyn seems like home.
Brooklyn in
More
the house, huh?
Brooklyn is more home now. Yes.
Um, I like to ask people who they are, but I'm going to put a little twist because I'm sure you're always asked this question: who is Dr. Terrence Blackman? So I'm going to ask you this: what are three things that come to mind when you think about yourself?
Mathematics, mathematics in the service of poor people and in the service of African Americans and more broadly folks from the Caribbean and part of the diaspora and family, I suppose. Yeah, family, mathematics, and service to community.
What is the latest for you, or the latest news for you in the academic arena?
Well, it turns out that you caught me on a perfect weekend. I'm actually preparing to come back to Brooklyn. I've recently sort of come to terms with the folks at Medgar Evers College to return to be of service in the leadership capacity in the mathematics department. So I expect that I will be at Medgar Evers for the foreseeable future, hoping to be a steward for mathematics at Medgar Evers College and more broadly in the Central Brooklyn community.
Congratulations, brother.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think the folks at Medgar Evers, if I might be immodest, made a good decision in inviting me to come back and help them to move the challenge of mathematics forward in our community.
Awesome. Why is science education necessary in our community?
Well, I think that the conversation you just had with Lance sort of I think segues very nicely into our conversation.
Mhm.
So I just returned from so I'll answer this first with an anecdote, so to speak. I just returned from Providence, Rhode Island, and we attended the conference for African American researchers in the mathematical sciences.
Mhm.
And one of the speakers in that conference pointed out that African Americans sort of constituted about 1.2%
Mm.
of the doctorates in mathematics in 2011, and this was not sort of this was more or less tradition. I think that the highest number would be around about 2 or 3%. Well, African Americans constitute about 12% of the population of the United States. So you're looking at a factor of about 10 below where we ought to be in this
Mm.
in science and engineering. And more importantly, the point was made that I do science. It's a the more science you do, the more likely it is that you will be able to earn some decent money. The more likely it is that you will have some autonomy at your job. The more likely it is that you will be able to sort of influence your community in a substantive positive way. And so it seems to me that African Americans, and not just African Americans, I often have these conversations, and because my interest is African Americans,
Mm.
and I make no apologies for that. I think that's entirely appropriate. I don't ever want the impression to be left that my concerns are only about African Americans.
Mhm.
My concerns are about Americans broadly and the participation of Americans in science. But my initial close concern are those around African Americans in science because, for obvious reasons, my nieces and nephews are African Americans. And I see clearly my son is an African American, my daughter is an African American. And I see clearly the impact that science education has in terms of their possibilities for actualizing their potential. So I think it is, and Lance, I think in his remarks really captured that in some sense mathematics and science, and this is not to say that arts are not important. And it's not to say that the arts don't inform
Mhm.
mathematics and science, but but I think that it is clear that the world in which we live requires really strong science and math skills in order for us to survive and
Mhm.
thrive. I mean, this setup that we're a part of,
Yeah.
the microphones, for example, I should say, about 90% of the microphones that we use in our cell phones and these microphones are part of a patents from a gentleman named James West who worked at Bell Labs, who is African American. Many people actually don't know this, right? So every aspect of our lives in the 21st century is informed by science and technology. And what I want to see are that the young people in my community are not simply consumers of the technology, but they are also makers of the technology. And I think that the technology can benefit. So it's not just simply sort of, I want African Americans to participate but it's because I think the entire scientific enterprise can be better with the participation of broader folks, as to use the vernacular of Lance, if more people come to this party, I think we'll have a better party.
Why do you think there is this declining number of blacks in math and sciences?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons. Stereotypes. I think people's perceptions of what's there. I think often there are sort of economic questions. People perceive this as not being an economically viable. But I think sort of initially just questions about stereotypes. I mean, I just yesterday my young niece picked me up from the airport, and as a good uncle should, he asked her how she was doing in her math, and she said to me, "Well, it's hard." And it struck me at that moment that here her uncle was coming from this conference of mathematics, and his niece was complaining to him that it was hard, and she was concerned that perhaps. So these stereotypes, I think, are extremely important. And they inform the way that our children encounter these disciplines. So when you say, perhaps this is why I started off when you asked me, who are you? And I started off by saying, mathematics, because I wanted to have that identification be there for our young people. Quite often, when they think mathematics, they don't think of themselves as being part of that process. And so I think that stereotype is really a big thing, so that often students find themselves in schools and not perceiving themselves as the mathematicians or the scientists. And so I think this is something that is extremely important. I also think that often we don't see the critical connections between what our anticipated goals are and the mathematics that we have to do in order to get to those goals. So one thing you'll find quite surprising is that many of almost on par, young African American boys and girls, quite often in middle school and in elementary school and even in high school, they often think of themselves as wanting to engage in the scientific problem. It's only after they get to college and they realize that they did not do some things as the basics. And so then they realize that this is going to be a really long road. And so this becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. So, I mean, this is part of what I hope that we will be able to kind of make some dent at.
How can our communities help to rectify this?
Yeah, I think this is in some sense the most important thing. We broadly have to take responsibility for our children. Think for a moment. We're here in Brooklyn. Let's say you lived in Canarsie, and maybe there are folks here who are listening this evening in Canarsie. It would be interesting to find out how many places in Canarsie you can take a young 12, 13, 14-year-old to do some enrichment in mathematics on Saturday morning. So that's the kind of question that we need to ask. Where can we have our young people be engaged in these things outside of the very narrow confines of the school? So we need to culturally take some responsibility. I mean, I think in this, it's quite interesting to look at the kind of Guyanese experience for a small number of individuals. So now, in retrospect, a very small number of individuals relative to the population, but certainly there was a very strong sense of parents taking responsibility, elders taking responsibility. That is still reflected now, as Lance just pointed out. He seemed quite current with the high school results for how students. I mean, how current are we today in Brooklyn with the high school results for our children? Are we clear about what the level of math and what the level of science they're doing? And I think that this sense of our community as having a personal responsibility for the development of these skills of our children, I think is a very, very vital thing. And I think it's at the foundation. All of the other things then build on our commitment as a community to focus on the livelihood of our children in these scientific endeavors. And I don't say this is easy.
Right.
I struggle with this myself. I don't say that, I have children. I know how difficult it is. But part of what I want to emphasize is that this is something that we have to do as a community. It's not going to be something that gets done for us.
What I want to ask you this about math. What have you discovered, or what do you know about math that would surprise many of us?
So this is good. So my particular area of focus is called number theory. And what have I discovered? So my dissertation was broadly based in something, in a problem that sort of asks the following question. It says, can you hear the shape of a drum? So if you had perfect pitch,
yes,
and someone played a drum outside of this room, could you tell me what shape it was? Could you tell me if it was a circle, if it was a triangle, what shape was it?
Really?
Yes. And so there are lots of important sort of mathematical questions involved here, but broadly, sort of my dissertation sort of accomplished the following thing. So there's something called the Jockey Langlands correspondence, and what it says in the language of drums, let's say, is that there are a pile of drums on this side that have some special characteristic, and there's another big pile of drums on that side that have a special characteristic. But these piles are really huge piles. And so everyone knew that pile A was related to pile B, but they didn't know which drum in pile A was related to which drum in pile B. And so my dissertation established that these particular drums in pile A were related to those particular drums in pile B, and it was good enough to get me sort of some things. Yeah, so it was actually a good piece of work. I mean, I say that not boastfully.
This must be a characteristic of mathematicians that, for some reason or the other, you guys develop an intimacy with challenges, with difficulty. When you picked this particular topic for your dissertation, did you look at it in the scale of difficulty, or it was just curiosity?
Well, yes. I actually wanted to take the one that was hard. Yeah, because I figured I was going to spend a lot of time doing something, and so I didn't want to spend. I mean, it's I have a friend named Nigel Kelly who was a high jumper, and so as a young kid we did lots of high jumping. And so when you do high jumping in the competition, the point is there's no need to jump 3 feet lots of times. So once you've established you can jump 3 feet, you should put the bar high and try to figure out what's the highest thing you can jump. The competition is won not on jumping 3 feet 10 times, but maybe on jumping 8 feet once. So my view is you choose the hardest thing that you can do and do that. So it's clear if you can do the hard thing, it's
I like that.
It's absolutely the case. It's absolutely the case that you're going to be able to jump 3 feet if you can jump 8. So and it's also I think there's a learning lesson there too. I think often, and this is one of the things going back to our early conversation about education.
Yes.
Often our kids don't recognize we spend an inordinate amount of time jumping 3 feet. Our kids need to be put in situations where they jump 8 feet. Well, maybe 8. I think the world record is probably just a little more than 8 feet. But our kids need to be put in positions where they're challenged.
To move the bar.
To move the bar up. And I think that the response for far too long in many segments of our community has been to sort of not challenge our kids in as robust a way as we can challenge them. And so I think that point you made is sort of, for me, I think it's the way we learn, it's the way we move. And it turns out that what happens is that you don't know what your strengths are until you're in the position of that challenge. You see, so people often will sit there, and because the thing that they're doing is not eliciting from them the particular gift that they have, they can't see that doing something far more challenging than the thing that they're doing.
Like what we just did here with you and Lance.
It's exactly. That's what I was
I was on pins and needles, like, please.
Well, I'm glad I was able to challenge you.
Technology don't fail me now. Terrence, are you influenced by current teaching trends, or do you follow your own style?
No, I think I'm influenced by the trends.
Mm-hmm.
I'm influenced certainly by the technology. I think the technology, as Lance and as many people have recognized, the technology provides us a way to do things more efficiently, but and it provides us a way to do things more innovatively.
Mm-hmm.
But at the base of teaching and learning, and the third thing I want to add to that is, and my colleague John Belcher has sort of been very forceful in reminding me of this, we should be thinking teaching, learning, and knowledge production. So we have to make knowledge. We have to make knowledge. We have to make things. We don't want our kids to learn for learning's sake. It's not just taking the exam. I want to see young people building apps. Yeah, we need teaching, learning, and we need to have our kids see themselves as knowledge producers.
Mm-hmm.
So in that game of teaching, learning, and knowledge production, at the base of that game are these relationships.
Yes.
Are the individual human relationships. In some sense, these apprentice, master, apprentice, mentor, these relationships I think are quite vital, and you can't get away from these relationships. And so when I say technology, I think, filling an elementary school with iPads and not having someone there with the human capacity
mm-hmm.
to discern for young people in that room what the important things are, I think is not a very useful tool. So I first go to the human relationships, and then I overlay those human relationships with technology as determined by the humans who are in that situation. So I often read these things. So my sort of philosophy is I use technology in education, but I make the point.
Yeah.
I'm using technology to do mathematics. I'm not just randomly using technology. I'm using technology as a tool to accomplish something. We're using technology as a tool to accomplish this interview and to disseminate this interview. But we're not just simply having the technology completely go crazy. Mm-hmm. So I think this is an important thing to emphasize, that teaching as a philosophy is a fundamentally human thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to treat it as such. And I think this is also one of the problems in many of our schools.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which this humanity, these relationships that need to develop, the sort of trust that allows me to be vulnerable in your presence, that allows me to learn something, that allows me to say, I don't know, and to feel that it's not just simply a case of you taking advantage of the fact that there is a difference in the knowledge that we bring to the table, but that you and I are participating in some fundamentally human endeavor. Mm-hmm. I think this is for me at the basis of teaching. And then technology becomes a tool with which, in many forms, and I can talk about the use of technology in mathematics, but technology becomes a tool that one uses in order to more efficiently and more effectively communicate those things that one wants to.
Students, what are most students surprised to discover about math? when after they learn a little bit more about it? What are they surprised to discover?
Yeah, I think the thing that once you've done it, what you discover is that it's a language. Yes, it's a language like everything else. And so you learn how to read it and you learn how to speak it. And so I think that for me is always the someone says, well, what is your, often you have to write some statement that says, what is your teaching philosophy?
Uh,
And so I always say, well, my teaching philosophy is to create the circumstances to do whatever it is that I need to do so that at the end of the day, you can sit down, read the book independently for yourself, and to take it in ways that only you can take it, because only you have, there are gifts that you have that I don't have.
yes.
And so it's that sense in which if I can give you this sort of whatever is necessary so that you understand how to read the language, you understand how to speak, you understand how to write, and then you can write your own story, and I will be happy when I read it. So this is for me the teaching philosophy. If
There's a school of thought that proficiency of black students is far lower than other groups. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes. I mean, so there is a gap in terms, and the way I would say it, I wouldn't say proficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So the way one should think of this is that there is a testing regime that makes an assessment at very distinct points in the lives of students about where they are relative to specific things that are part of our national, for lack of a better word, our national curriculum. Over time, the data has sort of demonstrated that African Americans have not performed as well as students of other ethnic groups. This is true.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what does that gap represent?
Mm-hmm.
Well, properly understood, what that gap represents is, as we just articulated. Let me sort of back up some. So the question is, what does the gap in test scores represent?
Mm-hmm.
What does the gap in SAT math scores represent between? Well, here is one thing it does not represent. It does not represent a lack of capacity.
Mm.
Right? So it does not represent that at all. It simply reflects where someone is in terms of their mastery of a very, very limited set of skills at a particular point in their lives. And quite often, that is used in some way as a way of saying to our kids that you're not good enough to do this. The point is, at the other end of the world, it's really a question of drums. It's really a question of perfect pitch. It's really a question of having some ideas. And our kids often, because they haven't done these sort of very basic things well, because maybe they're bored. Mm-hmm. And so they don't like jumping 3 feet. And so they've not performed as effectively as they should have on these things. And so they're often cut out from places where I think their contribution. So part of what I'm saying is that, yes, as a group, in the United States, and I should argue that, because, certainly these data are not global in some sense, right? So is it the case that across the globe, African Americans or folks in general who are black perform less than and other ethnic groups in mathematics? And the answer to that question is clearly no, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that this is more an American problem. I'll say so. One of my dissertation advisors, his name is John Velling, and he was a professor here at Brooklyn College. Mm-hmm. He would always say something. He would always say, Terrence, understanding abstract structure, which is broadly what you're doing when you're understanding, working with abstract structure, mm-hmm. is not at all dependent upon skin color. And so the point is that performance in math. So if you have one black mathematician who's performing at the highest level, it says that there's nothing wrong fundamentally with someone being black in mathematics. What it says is that many of the people who are in the African American community are in communities that are underserved. I mean, I've worked at Medgar Evers. I know well the difference. I've worked at Medgar Evers, at Mount Holyoke College, at MIT, at the University of Denver. I know well the difference between the quality of education that a student receives at Medgar Evers College as opposed to one that a student receives at MIT, as opposed to one that a student receives at Mount Holyoke College. So the point is, there are many factors that contribute to what we see.
It's not just black and white.
It's not just black and white. And I think that, often we and more important, I think it's to see that it's not static. Right? See, often our kids run away with the sense that this is a static thing. There is this gap. And, often they'll say an achievement gap. But it's not an achievement gap. It's an opportunity gap.
Opportunity.
Yeah, you see, it's not an achievement gap. I mean, if you're here in Brooklyn and you're going to. I mean, I don't mean to say, but there is a difference between the Canarsie High School, South Shore High School, and let's just simply say, and Brooklyn Tech.
Yes.
There's a huge difference between the quality of education that you will receive in those places. More students, more African American students, more black students, more brown students are educated at places like South Shore High School, are educated at places like Erasmus. And these are this is the point. It's not as if these institutions are incapable of doing better. They're quite capable of doing better, but there are many challenges there which make it extremely difficult for some of the tasks. I mean, and I'm sure that at some point you'll have some, maybe a good bring a panel of high school teachers on, and have them sort of talk about some of the challenges that they experience in just trying to, go through the day, do the kinds of things that are necessary to prepare students for the Regents exams and prepare students for advanced placement exams and the SAT exams and so on, and more broadly to cultivate for our young people the sort of love of learning and the love of the disciplines that you need in order to move forward.
The playing field is level in terms of opportunity. Then the proficiency.
I have no doubt.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen this.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Like I said, I mean, it's one of the reasons that I'm often, when folks kind of imagine that these things are so daunting and so challenging that, why do them? It would be so hard to do them. I often feel that I know it's quite easy because I know that there are many people who not only do I know personally, but there are many people who I know who are quite proficient at these things, who look like me and who look like the young people that I see quite frequently. So I quite understand that these young people have the facility to do it. And the challenge for me and the challenge for our community broadly is to figure out how to provide them the resources that are necessary.